Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast, share it with a friend, and rate it when you get a chance. This is episode 30. Today we are going to be discussing GPA and Big Four recruiting. To answer the age-old question, does GPA matter at the Big Four accounting firms? I think this question has to be tackled from many different angles. There is no yes or no answer to this question. I'm sorry, but it depends on the person and the circumstances. For example, if you live in a small town in Wyoming and go to a small school in Wyoming, then yes, you need a good GPA to get into the Big Four. If on the other hand, you go to the University of Texas or BYU and your GPA is low, then I wouldn't worry about it. The Big Four do have minimum GPA requirements, but they aren't the same at all schools. At some schools like Texas and BYU, you only need a 3.2 GPA. At other schools, the GPA requirements are 3.7 and above. This is because the Big Four receive tons of candidates from those other schools. Therefore, to weed out those candidates, they raise the GPA requirements. It's much harder to get a 3.7 or 3.9 at a BYU or Texas than it is at a Baruch or University of Phoenix. Now, I know I'll get a bunch of emails from the Baruch people telling me how difficult it is at their school, but I'd ask these people to go to BYU or Texas and then let me know their thoughts on how difficult their school is. Now let's go over some other factors. Some of you might have other activities that could factor in, like beta alpha psi, but many people have this. Although this helps, it doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't guarantee anything because you aren't really being recruited by Big Four accounting firms when you go through the recruiting process. You are being recruited by whatever gatekeeper you are dealing with. If you go the traditional route, that gatekeeper is a Big Four recruiter that comes and recruits you at your school, and they really operate off a checklist. And on that checklist, beta alpha psi and other extracurricular activities don't count as extra credit. So although it looks really good and it might help you differentiate you if you're tied with another candidate, if you have a low GPA and you have these extracurricular activities, you're not going to beat out somebody with a higher GPA. And some examples of other gatekeepers are if you don't go to a big enough school, then your recruiter is the abyss that is the Big Four career website. Now, when you submit resumes to these career websites, you don't even know who you're being recruited by. So having extracurricular activities isn't necessarily going to help you. And then there's another form of gatekeeper that some people choose to go, and that's getting close to a partner at the Big Four. Now, just because you know a partner and they like you, it doesn't mean that they will get you a job. If you are going to get close to a partner, try to get close to a partner that has passion and likes to work hard. They will get you the job because they can push past the malaise that is the Big Four recruiting machine with all its checklists and red tape. And that's the other thing you have to understand. The Big Four recruiting process is littered with red tape. The Big Four recruiter on campus has a checklist and they follow it. They might imitate a human being and seem like they have a ton of authority, but in all honesty, they don't. The Big Four don't get married to personnel because they know that those people will probably leave soon. Therefore, there is no really true ideal candidate for them because they know even the best of the best will leave. They don't want a custom model candidate. They want an off-the-shelf candidate when they go shopping for people. Now, if you are the custom model, then you have to find the right fit into the Big Four. And this might mean adding a little bit more customization to your model. Before we go into some tactics that you could use to get around having a low GPA, I wanted to ask a question. Why do you want to work at the Big Four? Whenever I see the question on the internet about having a low GPA and how it affects your ability to work at the Big Four, I have some questions for that person. If you want to work at the Big Four so bad, then how did you get a bad GPA? I'm not trying to say that I think there's something wrong with the person as far as intelligence. I just question the motivation. If you were aware of the GPA requirement, then why don't you do everything to meet it? If you're still early on in college, just work to fix your GPA. Don't tell me you don't know what to do. There are many reasons why you could have a low GPA. Maybe it's a learning disability that you haven't investigated. Maybe you are just extremely disinterested. Maybe you have a job to pay for school and work around the clock, and having that job makes you too tired to study. Or maybe you have a family and you don't have time to study. You need to understand why you have a low GPA and whether you truly want to work at the Big Four, and whether getting a really high GPA should be one of your highest priorities, or whether getting a job at the Big Four should be one of your highest priorities. If you can get a job somewhere else with the GPA that you currently have, then I say you should go for it. If you bust your butt at that job, then usually great things will come to you, like an offer from a Big Four later on down the line. Even if you never get a job at the Big Four, maybe you can get promoted inside of a company and have a better career than a usual Big Four candidate. In conclusion, you need to understand how you got your bad GPA and whether you truly want to work at the Big Four before you proceed forth in your Big Four search. It's a good moment to pause and reflect. If you could not do the work at school, let me tell you that it doesn't get any easier in the Big Four. Now let's go over some tactics about how you can get around having a low GPA. The first tactic is moving to a big city with a lot of openings and apply to all the Big Four in those cities. If you work in a big city, you have a lot better chance of getting a job at the Big Four because all the Big Four will be present in that city and they'll have lots of clients. Additionally, you can move to a big city and apply to all mid-tier and regional accounting firms. Once you get accepted at one of these firms, you could gain a couple of years of experience at one of those firms. And after you've been there for a couple of years, you can then transfer to the Big Four. The Big Four like to see that you've worked somewhere, held a consistent job, and done well. You obviously have to interview well coming out of that firm, but you have a good chance of working at the Big Four after working at one of these mid-tier regional firms. Another strategy is you can work at a client of the Big Four. Going into industry is not a death sentence. But make sure you go to a company that is growing and that you will like. Make sure they have a good perception so that they also have a good perception with the Big Four. Then make sure you work really hard and get good reviews. In this scenario, you would transfer as well. Another strategy that you can use, accept a lower position at the Big Four. None of the above examples are suitable to you, then join the Big Four in the internal firm services department. This means become a recruiter yourself at the Big Four or become an admin at the Big Four. Once you are inside of the Big Four, it is much easier to transfer around the firm than it is to get inside of the firm from outside. I once saw an executive assistant who is a supreme brown noser go from being just a simple executive assistant to getting promoted to senior associate in client services without having an accounting degree or any clients. It also helped that she was optically pleasing, but this scenario just goes to show you that it's easy to transfer once you are inside of the Big Four firms versus trying to get into client service from outside of the Big Four. Another strategy is you can look on LinkedIn and Indeed to see where the most Big Four openings are and ask your Big Four recruiter at your school about that city and about that industry, and also be specific about the line of service as well. The Big Four always need bodies somewhere. They always have some big project somewhere. And if you can locate where that is and give that to your recruiter, you have a much better chance of getting into that group, that line of service at that firm. Sometimes the recruiters don't know where these are. So you doing the research yourself and bringing it to them will help you get that job, even if you have a low GPA. And make sure you subscribe to this podcast because we're going to have even more strategies in future podcasts. In conclusion, can you get inside of the Big Four accounting firms with a low GPA? Yes, I believe you can. But you yourself have to believe in it. Write it down somewhere. Write it every day. Make it all you think about so that your conscious and subconscious brain will work to get you there. If you do this, your brain will solve this problem somehow. You will either use some of the strategies that I spoke about before, or you'll come up with a derivative strategy on your own. Whichever way you choose, I wish you luck. Make sure to visit big4accountingfirms.com. Subscribe to this podcast, share it with a friend, and also make sure to rate it. This podcast was also brought to you by Big Four Accounting Firms Interview Questions book. We have a book on Amazon called Big Four Accounting Firms Interview Questions. And what this book has is 32 interview questions and answers that you're likely to be asked on a Big Four interview. Go to Amazon and check that out today. Thanks for listening and good luck.